and welcome to another episode of Uni Eng Talk, a co-production by me, Faiza Ashraf, an engineering student, and the researcher Eleni Hadjigeorgiou. The podcast is funded by Newcastle University Sage Participatory Research Fund, inspired and scientifically supported by the Peer Networks for Engineers project, and which is funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering Diversity Impact Programme.
Hi, I am Eleni and I am an applied social scientist with experience working with disadvantaged communities using participatory action research and entrepreneurial methods to co-produce knowledge and in this way empower them to take the lead role in their own context. We're here because even though the university aspires to be a welcoming and inclusive place for all students, we know that it doesn't always feel like this, especially for students from minoritized or underrepresented groups like ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA, people of color, and in the engineering context, also women. In our research, we first explored through a really systematic reviews what peer networks have been implemented to increase inclusion in engineering undergraduate students, and specifically the barriers and facilitators of these peer networks to increase sense of belonging. We quickly noticed that there are no studies carried out for peer networks in engineering undergraduate students in the UK context, and therefore we felt the need to carry out a digital auto-ethnography using a digital platform called Indimo to capture the voices of inclusion and exclusion from the minoritized groups in Newcastle University. The identified peer networks from the really systematic review were given to the engineering school students to choose and prioritize three that they deem more beneficial to them. The mechanisms of inclusion and exclusion and the barriers and facilitators of the identified peer networks that they were chosen by the students to implement in Newcastle University were discussed in a World Cafe setting where we gathered all together to formulate the change we wanted to see through each of these interventions. And the research does not end there. It is now passed on to the hands of the very capable students. And through this podcast, they're going to further explore the feelings of belonging as well as disseminate the findings of this project and also carry out their chosen peer networks. All the best.
This is episode 3. We're talking about BAME and engineering, and we have a guest today, Ali Hussein. Would you like to talk about yourself and tell us your experiences?
Yeah, so my name's Ali. I do mechanical engineering. I'm a third year. My experiences in the university and engineering, being a person of colour, have been sort of mixed. There have been a few where it's like, oh, I don't really want to be here. But recently now, there's it's a lot nicer. Like when I first started, I think it was pretty hard to make friends because I think a lot of people made friends on socials, going out, drinking. But I don't drink, so it was a little bit tough at first to make friends. But obviously now it's a lot nicer because I've found people that I'm good friends with. Drinking or they don't drink doesn't make a difference now. But it's been a bit varied.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about before on the podcast as well, but the idea of societies, especially the engineering ones, very much focus on like kind of nightlife nighttime activities and stuff, which obviously is fine if you want to go out, but they should also try and push more like daytime activities that everyone can enjoy, because there's a lot of reasons people can't do nighttime activities. For example, not drinking, or they live far away, there's no way to get back home. So it would be nice for them to be able to engage in those sorts of things as well. Any other experiences you had? Any good things that Newcastle University have kind of put out there that's been helpful for you?
Yeah, I think that obviously, like you touched upon, the societies. I'm not sure how the other engineering societies are, but mechanical engineering is actually pretty good for the non-drinking aspect of it. They do a lot of socials like go-karting and paintballing. I think the only issue with that is when people see like night out and stuff, they don't really think about the money. It's just a ticket. No one thinks that, oh, they'll end up spending 30, 40 quid, which they
Yeah.
probably would end up doing on drinks. All they really see is like an £8 ticket. But with obviously like the paintballing and stuff, no one sees, like, even me, I can see, oh, like £35, £40 upfront cost. And everyone's like, nah, I don't really want to do that. So I do
Yeah.
get like the difference in it, where I think the engineering society mechanical is decent for that.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously it's still a bit harder to like do it, just because it is a lot of money up front to then think, oh yeah, I'll go do that. So there's definitely like a middle ground where you should be able to hit a sweet spot. But no, I think the other like good things about I do a lot of climbing with the uni, and they rarely have like they do have drinking socials, but a lot of their stuff is like on a Monday everyone comes to climb, and we'll sort of like just hang out there.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
And like you said before, so it's gotten better over the years, and that's just based on people you've met, or?
Yeah, I think because obviously at the start I did go to a few of the socials, and like going to those socials sober, I imagine for anyone is like a bit awful. So like I sort of stopped going, but then like just in lectures or just me playing for like the engineering football team and stuff like that, I have met quite a few people. So now we have like a little group.
Yeah.
That's like friends with another group, so I can pretty much talk to anyone on the course now, and like hang out doing other things like getting food or going climbing or stuff like that. So yeah, I think now it's definitely easier, just because I have met people.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think definitely if someone had, just come to the uni, Newcastle just in general, there's a big drinking culture.
Yeah,
here
absolutely.
compared to other cities. So I think for anyone like me or like yourself, just coming in, it is a bit hard to.
Yeah,
go
I
out and make
completely
friends.
understand
But,
that.
Yeah, I think after, but with a bit of time, it does get better. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate. Like, obviously, I'm kind of going through the same thing. But I've kind of found that I can still go to things, just grab myself a Coke or something instead. But
Yeah.
it is nice to have those daytime activities where I feel like, especially during Freshers Week, I felt I made more friends in those like activities that you do in the daytime.
Yeah.
Like, I think we went mini golfing, and that's where I met most of my friends. So it's definitely something that it's good that Mech is doing a lot with that. I think other engineering societies might want to push that a bit more.
Yeah.
All right, so something we're talking about specifically in this episode, we're going to be using the term BAME a lot. But BAME as an acronym in general is very problematic as it is reductive. It makes all people of colour seem like they've been put under this umbrella term. And there's a lot of different people of colour. There's Black African, Southeast and South Asian, and other people of colour as well. And so to put everyone in this one acronym, it's almost like putting everyone's problems in this one umbrella term, where everyone's problems of people of colour are very different. They range a lot.
Yeah, no, I think definitely like grouping any group of people under a singular label. I think no one really likes to be put under one single label. Even, for example, like if just anyone in general, like if you just said, oh, like those group of guys over there, it already has like a sort of negative thing where it's like, oh, there's already a preconceived assumption about these people. So I think yeah, grouping anyone under a big label like that, it just sort of like minimizes their like themselves as being like an actual person.
Yeah.
It just like makes them seem as like part of a group.
Exactly.
But realistically, there's a lot more like someone under the umbrella of BAME. Black people will go through something very different to what I go through.
Exactly.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that what they go through is more or less than what I go through.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when you talk about BAME issues, it just does sort of group.
Yeah, and the issues are so different.
Yeah.
For example, I don't know if you've ever felt this, and this is something I will touch on later as well, but something that I've noticed a lot is this idea of sort of good racism when it comes to Asians, of people sort of claiming that, oh, but you should be really good at your studies because you're Asian.
Yeah.
And they don't think it's a claim that's bad because in a way they think it's complimenting. But like I personally have found that like quite hard to deal with sometimes, because I will be like finding something difficult and almost taking that stereotype into my head, like, well, why can't I find this easier? I'm supposed to be good at this.
Yeah.
And like some people don't think it's damaging, they think it's good, but it's just any stereotype like that isn't like fair to say to anyone because everyone's different regardless
Yeah.
of your race.
No, I think a lot of these stereotypes have just been like reinforced over a big period of time. So even for example, like black people, they might have those stereotypes around Asian people where they're like, oh yeah, well, like Chinese people are supposed to be good at maths, so like they'll meet someone, and so I think even within the whole BAME umbrella, there is still those like conceptions about and those little prejudices. But yeah, I think just the fact that there is a group to be named by, then it just sort of removes that whole people's like
Yeah.
differences are different.
It is like everyone needs to acknowledge that we will be using the term, but we should acknowledge that grouping so many problems into just one term is not necessarily the correct way to go about it. All right, so we'll start talking about some of the engineering student quotes that we got from our Indemo autoethnography. The first kind of topic we're going to touch on is Newcastle City in general being very white-based, white-cultured. So the first participant said, "My hair is like very different to straight hair. Back home, I just had like a black barber, but when I came here, I couldn't really find one. It took me a while. As well as hair products, stuff like alcohol too, because I feel like people of different races drink differently. Also clubs and stuff like that. I guess I listen to very different music, so I don't really like or know lots of the music that people listen to here in Newcastle. And yeah, I wish there were more places that play different types of music." So with this first quote, it's very much kind of personal care and such that you can understand that, when you're from the same race, things like hair and stuff, you like someone from your race would understand best how to take care of it, what products to use. When you're in like somewhere that's obviously very white dominated, you might not feel like you have the same sort of ability to have those products to get that advice.
Yeah, no, I definitely like understand where this person's coming from. For me, it's not necessarily the hair. Like for me, it's like food. Like where I'm from, there's food's really nice, and I don't really have to like think about, oh, can I eat here? Can I eat here? So I definitely get that. I don't necessarily think that this particularly is like a race issue or a BAME issue. I just think it is because there is a lot of white people in Newcastle, so naturally there will be a lot of white barbers and stuff. So no, I definitely like this resonates a little bit.
Yeah,
But,
especially with the food, what you're saying, like, for example, like halal meat, it's very hard to find
exactly.
in every place, and you have to be quite careful making sure you find places with it.
Yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, I get it. But then also like for example the stuff like with the music and stuff like that. I think that sort of stuff like you can just sort of like listen to different things, because it is if like in a place like Newcastle, I'm not really going to find like many Pakistani people like just out and about.
Yeah.
So you do sort of have to put yourself in situations where you're not necessarily comfortable, but it's not like a bad situation to be in.
No.
Like if I'm in like a pub or something with friends and I'm drinking a Coke, there's necessarily like music that I'm not going to like. I'm not necessarily just going to leave.
Exactly, you should be open to trying it out.
I get it, but I think in those scenarios, obviously, find a black barber because you don't want some guy like messing up your hair.
Yeah.
But yeah, stuff like that, like the food, and it just takes time.
Exactly. Participant 2 kind of spoke about something somewhat similar. I do not enjoy the music played in Newcastle, so I do not go out with the rest, but find Asian balls to go to and dance where I feel very happy and safe. So again, I think I agree with you. Like, you do need to try different things, but like from my experience as well, I do like there are maybe they should do more of them, but there are like Asian nights out and stuff, or like specific nights out for specific, people of color.
Right.
And I think that should be invested in more because it is like nice to feel comfortable and feel like you do have your music around somewhere.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it'd be a lot like a lot nicer for people like us, and we'd be a little bit more happier if there were stuff like that. I just think a lot of it will be overlooked because Newcastle is generally very white. So like for example, like the societies that you go to, they don't necessarily think, oh, should we do an Asian night out for a lot of the Asian students? It'll just be, oh, should we do a night out? And because that is the culture in Newcastle where you'll go out, listen to a certain type of music, drinking a certain type of beer. You just sort of then naturally go for those lines. But yeah, I think it's definitely something like people like us need to.
And that's why having societies are so important, because a lot of the nights out you'll find of like people of color's nights out for specific, ethnicities will be through their societies. So a lot of like, for example, the South Asian Society do a lot of Asian nights out that I know about. So it just shows the value of having our societies and like that actually appreciate people of color.
Yeah, I think with that as well, like for example, I didn't even know that South Asian societies do like Asian nights out. So I don't think there is a lot of publicity, for lack of a better word for it, out there. So like for me, like night out, I don't think I've been on a night out since like year one. So like I'd much prefer to sit at a priest, talk to people, and then it's like when everyone's going out, I'll just go back to my room, order a takeaway, and then just sit in bed and watch a movie. But if I knew that there's something like that, then I'd definitely go.
Yeah, and it's a great way to meet people that are more kindred spirits because they kind of get it.
Because as much as like I have a lot of white friends, black friends, Asians, as much as I like my white and black friends, they don't necessarily understand everything.
Exactly.
That I'd have been through, and so like even for example like me code switching when I'm at home and I'm speaking to my friends, I like code switch all the time. So like half the time I'm speaking in English, and half the time I'm speaking in my language, and it just makes the conversation feel a little bit better in those scenarios. So definitely, if I knew like if there were these things going on here, I'd get involved and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just don't think there's enough like talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the third participant wrote, "I'm worried. Say I'm going to a GP back home. My GPs would be authentic minority, so they'd be able to kind of tailor to me. Say I came with a type feeling, he'd be, you have dark skin, you take vitamin D tablets, so now take every day. And another person of color, you talk to him. I have less experience here with other people of ethnic minorities, and yeah, that is one thing I'm worried about." So in terms of from being South Asian kind of person of color, something that I can comment on is that women generally up to a quarter can be anemic or have issues related to anemia. And that is something that commonly in like countries from our region, you actually get monitored for and routinely checked for, but that's not something you have here, which can end up being quite damaging to certain people who aren't aware of that fact and aren't pushing to get monitored. Again, I think that is just a problem with obviously being in a different country that is, very white dominated, but I can see like from this person, it's very much more of a worry about their health.
Yeah. No, I think for sure like what you said, just in other countries, these issues are looked on, but just because Newcastle is a white city and England is a white country, those issues are just overlooked. I don't think necessarily they're overlooked maliciously. It's just because they wouldn't think of it.
Exactly.
So yeah, I feel like the GP, for example, like I just didn't switch my GP to Newcastle. Like if I need to go, I just go back home, just because like when I'm comfortable and two, I'm like used to it. So yeah, like definitely get like the worried about it. Just because it's like I was saying before, it's easier to talk to people like yourself, like who know what you've been through, know what you're going through. Yeah, it's just a lot easier.
Yeah. All right. So the next set of quotes that we're going to talk about are in terms of Newcastle University's white image versus the Luther King virtue signaling. For context, for anyone who does not know about Newcastle University, we have newly made spoons called Luthers, named after Luther King, I believe. But we'll have a look through these quotes and see what people say. So the first quote says, "I think the university image is a bit outdated because right now the university has this whole, image of, a red brick. All those, all the history and stuff like that, just the way it portrays itself. It can pull a lot of people off from applying. And that does affect the diversity of the university because, if it still holds onto that history too much, it's just going to encourage people from private schools from applying and just prevent people from applying. Yeah, that's why I think the image of the university needs to be modified for the 21st century and make a more inclusive or people of other backgrounds too." So this is very much about the university's history. in being a red brick university, being a Russell Group university.
Right.
I personally don't really see it being necessarily an issue.
No, I
For-
disagree with the statement, just because I think like the image of the university is based off the history of the city. You can't really change the history of the city. Just as like I wouldn't want anyone changing the history of like my people. I think it'd be a bit unfair to ask the people who necessarily like built Newcastle and built the university. So like a lot of the buildings, they'll be named after, the like previous lecturers and people who paid for the building. I think it'd be a bit of an insult to them and the people who actually did build the city. Because like 100, 200, 300 years ago, there weren't a lot of minorities around. So I get that the history will be full of white people.
Yeah.
Because it was full of white people.
I do think, our campus continues to grow. They can invest in starting to maybe name it after more ethnic minority, like people who are famous in Newcastle.
Yeah.
And they can invest in that. But I completely agree with that. I think also, in general, maybe this is just my opinion, Newcastle doesn't, like, comparative to other universities, it doesn't necessarily like portray itself as a red brick as much. Like, it's not as strict as certain other universities are in that regard. It's quite modern and quite inclusive.
Yeah, like it's not like, for example, Oxford or Cambridge, where there is a very clear, distinctive group of people that go there. Like, I know lots of different groups of people that go to Newcastle. So I think like I think they are moving towards the sort of a little bit more inclusive. Just for example, like the new buildings that we have got, like for example, Luther's, named after Martin Luther King, who obviously came here in the 60s or whatever it was. And then you've got Dame Margaret Barber, So I think they're moving towards the
Exactly.
people that sort of deserve it will get it.
And just a note on the private school kind of comment, that it is true, a lot of private school people do come here, but I would argue, Newcastle does try and cater for many people. For example, Newcastle has its partners program for people of, backgrounds that are not as rich as they would like to also have a chance to be able to come to this university. So in that regard, I'd say it's quite inclusive.
Yeah, and I think the reason like it has a big private sort of school reputation for it is for specific like subjects that realistically only like private school people that apply for. It's like I know a lot of agriculture students, and usually they all come from pretty fairly rich backgrounds.
Yeah.
So.
And that also just comes down to certain universities are good for certain subjects.
So like Newcastle is good for
it's
agriculture.
Renowned for its agriculture.
So then it's just natural that a lot of people who come here will come for agriculture. Exactly. I don't think necessarily that's a bad thing. I think the agrics themselves, they have a bad reputation, but I don't really think that's accountable for the actual university itself. It might give it a negative light in it, but I don't think there's much that Newcastle, they're not really going to like make the quality of education any worse.
Exactly,
just to better their image. I think they first and foremost are a teaching establishment. They need to, teach. I get it might cause like a bit of a, but I think the statement doesn't really apply.
Yeah, exactly. The second husband, again, very much what we've been talking about. The fact that most people, the university honours with buildings named after them were privileged white men, it doesn't really help with the whole diversity thing. I think, what you said, if, they've clearly done something for the university, so it's not that they don't deserve to be there, but they should, and they are, starting to introduce more diverse people into, like, being named after buildings.
Yeah, because the way the buildings are named is, like, if the person who paid for it was like, oh, well, I want my name on it. So I think there's a few buildings around where someone's paid for it and you just get that's like fair enough. Like, I think if I probably paid for a building and so just stick my name like big writing. That's fair enough. But a lot of the other buildings they named after like lecturers. So like I think there's the Herschel building was named. I did a job for the student ambassadors and a lot of them were like calling student alumni, previous alumni, sorry. and a lot of them I spoke to went to Newcastle in the 50s and 60s, and so they knew all these lecturers
Oh,
who the
wow.
buildings were named after. So I get that. I don't necessarily think it's white privileged men. I think they earned their privilege by being a faithful servant to the uni for that long.
And that's more of that's more a portrayal of the way that the world was back then.
Yeah, I think it's for example, if these people had nothing to do with the uni, fair enough. But then on the reverse, I could just argue, oh, then why is Martin Luther King have a building? Realistically, he's not done anything for the city of Newcastle, but he has earned his privilege by being, such an influential person. So, no one's going to complain about Luther's being named after him. So I think it'd be a bit...
Well, interesting you say that.
I see that. But do you know what I mean? I think
exactly.
it'd be wrong
no,
to
I
complain,
completely understand.
we should get rid of Martin Luther King's name because why is he there? I think it'd be wrong to do that, just as it'd be wrong to, why is the Stevenson building named after Stevenson? I think the buildings are named pretty aptly, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of Luther's, Participant 3 wrote, one thing I don't like about the uni is the whole Luther's bar thing. I just find it really weird. How? There's a bar with pictures of Luther King on the outside in the windows, his name on it, but it's not really associated him at all. It just seems like, what's it called again? Virtue signaling. Yeah, just trying to benefit off it. It just looks like that because they have a statue, they have those pictures, they have a bonding up there, but it's not really doing anything. I kind of understand to a degree what this person's saying. Maybe there should be a bit more talk of, the fact that Luther visited here and why he's so prevalent in what they've done. But again, I think part of it is just looking at the fact that there is a reason why it's there, and that is as a symbol.
I don't think many people actually know why he came or if he came. That. I understand the point they're making. I just don't think it has any relevance because, he came here for a specific reason, and obviously he's got a statue. I think on the reverse, if someone like that came and then nothing was done about it, there'd be an issue as well.
Yeah. I think there could be more to again. We don't really know, so it would be nice if there was some more history somewhere written of it.
If you want to know, you have to sort of look in for yourself. But I think that goes with all the buildings. So it'd probably be best that if you want to know about the buildings, they should do a little plaque somewhere. And there probably is. I just haven't read it. I'm pretty sure there's a plaque on the statue for Martin Luther King, but it's just never occurred to me I should go read it. I get the point.
Maybe the uni in general, not just for the Martin Luther King, not just for Luther's Bar, but for all of these buildings, could invest in maybe doing a couple of talks or something for anyone that's interested about the history of each building and who it's named after, why they might be important.
Yeah, when I mentioned before, when I used to call the alumni, one of the people that I called was at front row when he came. So he told me all about it, which made a little bit more sense. But if I hadn't
heard it, you wouldn't know.
I'd wouldn't know, and realistically probably wouldn't have cared because I'm it's just doesn't really apply to me anymore.
Yeah.
I just know it as Luther's.
Exactly.
I go whatever. I think it is the person here says it's got nothing to do with him. I think it does. It's sort of honouring his visit to Newcastle. Maybe they should do a little bit more to say why he came here, what he's done, and that sort of thing. Talk about the fact that he has an honorary doctorate from here. Plus, I think if any building was going to be named after Martin Luther King, a social space probably, is one of the best places for him to be named after. So I think them saying that, the bar has no relevance to him being named. I think he was a pretty big advocate on, stopping racism. So I think, a place where a lot of people from different races go to hang out, not a bad.
No, it's quite a nice. If you think about it a lot, then you do kind of realise the symbolism for it is quite nice.
It does make sense. It makes a lot more sense than him being named after a medical building or an engineering
I never thought
building.
about it that way, but I see what you
think
mean.
The actual society, where everyone goes to hang out, that being named after him makes the most sense. Maybe they should just in front of like where the entrance is, or this is named this because of whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think
No,
it is, yeah.
that's completely fair. Just around a couple of statistics we have for Newcastle University in general. Only 22.3 within the School of Engineering come from, staff-wise, come from a BAME background, with 70.8% of professors being white males, and there are no female BAME professors in our School of Engineering. I think those are some telling statistics on the fact that there is clearly quite a low percentage of BAME in general, and obviously more so with female BAME professors, which is a quite upsetting figure, to be honest.
Yeah.
You'd hope there would be more people of colour being able to, you know, be professors.
Yeah, I think especially in like the education industry, like a lot of the jobs that people get is based on merit of like who you know, not what you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if there was we'll hire someone who is the best at the job, you'd see a lot more people that are people of colour.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like a lot of people, like I think in most industries anyway, just get the job because of the
It's all about
people
who you know,
yeah,
essentially.
Exactly. But yeah, no, it is definitely a figure that I think Newcastle should probably look into and
Exactly, yeah. All right, so the next sort of quotes we're going to talk about are on people of colour and the feeling of dropping out, sort of feeling very hopeless. So the first quote we have is, "Some of the reasons that make me feel excluded stem down to one main thing, apparent lack of diversity. As it is sometimes hard to find people like me or that had a similar upbringing. The cultural differences I have with other students make it apparent that I'm not like them. This then trickles down into other issues like social barriers and academic challenges, where I find it hard to be sociable with someone as I know we are very different and may not have anything to talk about after a while. This also makes it difficult within the engineering school and classroom, where I struggle to ask for help if needed because of the social differences. There was a time where I thought I might drop out due to the academic challenges, but now that I have established a group of friends, it has made it easier and I do not feel like that any longer." I think that is just, in general, I think a lot of people feel like that, that's starting off of just feeling extremely alone. And I think part of it is the fear of, the idea of like not having anything to talk about, not being understood because of the cultural differences and such.
I definitely agree with the statement, probably because I wrote it.
Oh.
But yeah, no, definitely. I think like from when I first came, it was just a bit like I don't really want to speak to anyone. Because then, if I go speak to them, they'll be like, oh, he's not like us. We just, like, oh, we all go for a drink and he's not drinking.
Yeah.
Like, oh, he's a bit of a buzzkill sort of thing. So yeah, definitely like when it came to like asking for help, and a lot of the people like had already sort of made a group of friends. Like, I was sort of like go home and figure it out myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think once people start like hanging out with other people, talking, you won't make a lot of friends at first. You'll sort of, I think, figure out first who you don't want to be friends with. But yeah, like for me, I used to just, like I'm a bit of a loudmouth, so I just go speak to anyone.
Yeah.
But just more so like, if that person starts speaking back to me, then I know, I can sort of speak to this person.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I obviously don't feel like the start anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot easier now.
No, I think as well, like, again, Freshers Week is somewhere where you're supposed to meet a lot of friends, but it is heavily based on, like, nightlife and going out. And when you're not someone who wants to do that, you do very much feel like you're missing out on the opportunity to make friends, because you're kind of feeling like everyone's making their friends at that time, doing something that you're not very comfortable doing or don't want to necessarily do.
Yeah. And I think when a lot of people are out and they're drunk and, hanging out, they sort of get closer to each other as well. It's like I know a lot of like times where, a group of friends, including me, fairly close, doing like an activity at the start of fresh or something, and then they obviously all went on a night out. I didn't, and then obviously they come back closer just because they have that experience. You know, they hung out more than I do with them.
Yeah.
So it just makes them easier to sort of be friends with each other. So yeah, it's definitely hard. Like a solution for it though, I think is a little bit harder, just because you can't really say, oh, you shouldn't do nights out. And yeah, I'm not too sure like what the best.
Yeah, it is just. I think it's just a case of like. You need to. I mean, like, you know, what you've learned is that you can end up making friends.
Yeah.
You can end up like finding yourself in other situations. But once again, I'll say, from for example, the Freshers Week kind of point of view and societies in general, having activities that aren't necessarily drinking based are really important for people who don't feel comfortable or don't want to do something in that atmosphere. It's just really important to have other opportunities so that everyone can keep making friends.
Yeah, and I think that goes for a lot of like people who do drink as well. Where I've spoken to a lot of my friends who drink, but just aren't fond of like every single thing they do has to involve drinking. Like I think it's definitely more in Newcastle than other places, where even if like for example you're going out to go get food, everyone just stops at the pub first and has a few drinks. Like there's no plan where I feel like people make where it just doesn't involve going to get a few drinks. And I think that's more of a Newcastle thing than it is a university thing. So, like I've spoken to a lot of my friends who are like they're doing a social like for example I play for a football team, and some of my friends they drink but they just don't go to like these socials. Like every Wednesday having to spend like a bunch of money drinking
It's
loads
not what
and then
people
like on
want
a
to do.
costume, and like it's not like maybe like once in a blue moon, but every single week I think is a bit excessive even for people who do drink.
Yeah.
So I think like a lot of people that I've made friends with now understand why I don't go out, because obviously I don't drink, so it's like, oh, I can't even imagine wanting to be there. Like even while they're drunk, they're like, oh, this is a bit rubbish. Like obviously, yeah, I have been out a few times in first year. Sometimes it's all right, but what I found is just like after an hour or two, it's like, oh, I want to go home.
Yeah.
Just because
you just
like,
feel tired.
Everyone's really drunk. Like no, if the people you're with, they're all right. You know, the music's decent. You know, everyone's like not completely slobbering everywhere. You know, you can have a decent time, but that doesn't last very long.
Yeah.
So no, it's definitely not something that I think even people that do drink want to do all the time.
The next participant wrote, well, I'll read participant 2 and 3 together, since 3 is very short. But participant 2 wrote, less people of colour continue with the engineering. I don't know whether minority ethnic students do achieve comparably lower than 60%, or if it's just a collective choice. From my experience of talking to ethnic minority students, their performance is usually lower on assignments as opposed to exams, which may be unconscious bias as assignments are not anonymously marked. Participant 3 just wrote, I'll get my degree and disappear, which I think is quite telling of not exactly having the best time.
Yeah.
But in terms of what participant 2 wrote, Newcastle University itself has acknowledged in annual reports that there is an awarding gap between, for example, black and white students receiving a 2-1 of 14.4%. But they have made a commitment to reduce that gap by 10% by 2024 and 2025. So it is something that they've acknowledged, but it's a shame that it's something that does exist, that unconscious bias.
Yeah, I think that unconscious bias sort of exists in a lot of things as well. Obviously, I've not, I don't think anyway, have experienced this as of yet, but a similar unconscious bias is in like football. Like growing up, a lot of my teachers used to like try and get me into academies and stuff like that, like in primary school, but my parents would say no. And a reason for that is there is, and I think it's like pretty well documented as well, a big unconscious bias of like South Asian footballers getting into like professional football, just because like subconsciously people just like, I think there's like one in the Premier League, and I think that's like pretty telling.
Quite telling of
so I think that unconscious bias, like not only for like Asian students, but in different sort of scenarios that exist a lot for Black and other minorities. But yeah, I've not actually come across that. I thought the assignments were marked anonymously as well, to be honest.
Yeah, but I think that is just it is unfortunate that unconscious bias exists in most things, and again, there's like that bias could once again be taken in a sort of good sense of like they might see someone who's an Asian student and potentially essentially assume that they're going to do well in it, which sure works out for you, but it is still
Unfair.
an unconscious bias. And it's just not fair to have those kind of stereotypes. I know we're talking very much about people of color today, but we will be doing an episode soon on like international students and sort of their things. And I know from their point of view, they might not necessarily be people of color, but they do have kind of similar feelings of, obviously they're from a different country, so it's hard for them to like start somewhere new. And there are a lot of these stereotypes on them as well.
Yeah, 'cause I think obviously we have like in Newcastle a big population of international students coming from China and India, and I've spoken to a few of them, and a lot of them just don't like it here.
Yeah. I like, again, like participant 3 said, a lot of them do feel like that, like the idea of just getting their degree and like leaving, because they don't feel very, not safe, but like not very welcome sometimes in this area. They don't like the stereotypes, which is fair enough. And it just essentially makes them want to go as soon as they've got their degree.
Yeah. No, I think I'm a little bit like that as well. I think like I'll sort of once I do like not necessarily like forget about Newcastle, but not really like
Actively come here often.
yeah, like I it's not a place that like I feel attached to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it is just somewhere I come. Obviously, like friends, yeah, like I'd go see friends if they happen to be in Newcastle, yeah, for sure. But it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh yeah, like 10, 15 years down the line, I'd want to come. Like for example, I gave a tour a few weeks ago to a couple who met here 50 years ago, and I think every 10 years they come back. I could not see myself doing that.
Yeah. You don't have that
gripped
attachment
me
to
that
it.
much.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's fair
yeah.
enough. All right, so on to the next set of quotes. This is the last set of quotes that we have. And the topic of these are just not belonging in your own identity societies. So we've talked about the importance of societies and how they do bring people closer or to people who feel kindred to them. But I think these are examples where they don't necessarily feel like that. So participant 1 says, at Newcastle University, there are a few things that make me feel excluded, one of them being strong white areas where there are not many people of colour. This is seen in the LGBTQ society. I went to a few of the events last year, and there were very few people of colour at most events. There's just something uncomfortable about it, especially because queer spaces are meant for everyone, but at the same time, there is some exclusion to races. There is a bit of racism and a difference because of the privilege they have for being white. An example of this would be how you see in media. White feminism is not very intersectional, but the views are very different, and for me, I would have different views to another non-binary white person who wouldn't be able to see my point of view, as well as not being open to listening to it. So I think this is just like, again, a very specific feeling that someone's having. And I think I understand in terms of like, with the LGBTQ society, there is some forms of racism, kind of like that stereotype of sometimes they, a lot of, for example, Asians or certain like cultures or religions, they do assume they're not, well, some aren't as like accepting of these things. Yeah. But then if someone with that culture in mind has come to something that's LGBTQ related, you would assume that's someone who also feels the way you do. And so it's almost unfair to see them being treated with bias, because out of everyone you'd expect these people who've gone through what you've gone through to understand you the most and not have a bias upon you.
Yeah, no, I think obviously with this example as well, I think the reason why you probably might not see as many people of colour at these like specific societies and events is just because I think a lot of people of colour aren't necessarily that open about it, so just naturally they will not want to go to these open events,
Yeah.
which is probably why you don't see as many people of colour there.
And then the hard part is if there's not that many, when you go as
Yeah.
one person, you will feel just
Yeah.
out of place.
Like I think a few societies that I went to in first year, I went to one of the Pakistan Society events, and I'm pretty sure like I didn't see, like it was an ice skating thing, I think. There weren't very many Pakistani people there. So I thought, oh well, I'm not going to go again.
Yeah.
And I know, I don't know if you like realise, but like sometimes on campus they have like, you know, that tent in front of the Student Union where they have like a Christian week.
Yeah.
And, I went one for the like Islamic week, and I joined the ISOC, but I didn't really go to many events. And I went there, and at the time I had like blonde hair, just because like, I just bleached it. And one of the guys said to me, "Oh yeah, you're not a Muslim." So I'm like, "Oh, all right, cheers, I'm not coming again."
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely like, just even like amongst your own sort
No,
of,
completely.
like,
I
they have like these conceptions.
For example, I don't cover my hair, so sometimes I'm always
People
like,
will then
am I
judge-
going to just feel judged about the
Yeah.
idea that, because I plan on doing that in my own time, because that's how I've been raised to believe, like you do it when you're ready to, not because someone's told you to.
Yeah, because I think that.
But I would
doing
hate
it-
to be pressured.
Yeah, because I think doing it because you've been pressured to just sort of like creates a bit of a, oh well, I'm not doing it for myself, I'm just doing it for someone. So I think it like will make you resent it a little bit, and you'd rather take your time doing it than resent it. And I don't think like actual people who have like studied religion will say, oh, you need to do it right now because you have to. So like a lot of people that I've met that are like converts, for example, they still like drink, or they still do that just because that's what they've always done. They know that, you know, at some point, you know, they will stop, but it's just whenever they're comfortable to.
Yeah.
Like I don't think, especially like obviously I can't really speak in any other religions, but Islam, like if that is something that you're thinking, oh yeah, we'll do it. It's not, oh, you have to like become a perfect Muslim overnight, because realistically no one is.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things are a process. So like when you do go to like, you know, a society like that, and there's someone who, for example, like saying to me, because I have blonde hair, I'm not a Muslim, will just put you off.
Yeah, and that's that's a society where you would hope to feel included, because you're you know, it's something that you very much relate to, and so to essentially be told no you don't is quite disheartening.
Yeah, and like I mean, I've not been back to any of those things again, and I probably won't, just because like I mean I'm like pretty strong in my faith anyway, but I don't really need someone to tell me what I believe in or what I don't. But I can imagine for someone who, you know, is just coming into it. So for example, like the LGBT, and they go into this society looking for some sort of comfort, and they don't really see any comfort there. I can understand why, you know, no one
why you wouldn't want to go again.
Like it just feels pretty useless.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would just rather be on their own. So yeah, I think there's a lot of these societies that can maybe make a change.
Yeah, exactly.
In seeing, especially when it does come to like these religious societies.
Yeah.
I think it's a delicate issue anyway for someone
Absolutely.
who's coming into it. You don't really want to sort of bombard them with rules and regulations.
No, and society should be open for some people, like, for example, religious societies, you can be of not that religion and still, like, part of it is exploring things. So you shouldn't have to feel like not being able to go there and explore this society and see what it's about.
Like my old housemate, she was a Christian that was like heavily involved in like the Christian Union and stuff, and so whenever they had like events, she'd invite us, and we used to go because they give like free food and stuff. But like we'd go and just sort of like sit and like talk. That doesn't necessarily like mean that, oh, I'm going to convert. It's just like something that I just want to.
You should be free to.
So there'll be a lot of people that will come to these LGBTQ societies or religious societies or any society, not because they're interested in it, just because, you know, they might be bored or they just want to learn about something more. So I think and
but like even just going is part of that learning. Like you might not go with the intention to, but you end up learning something. So it should be a space where everyone does feel like they can come.
Yeah.
So like, you know, for example, in the LGBTQ society, ally or not, you can like go, and even if you don't necessarily identify with LGBTQ+, it would still be nice for everyone to be able to go, and I'm sure they are able to just go and explore what it's about and understand it more.
Yeah.
All right, so the next participant wrote, "On a university scale, I have had very uncomfortable conversations with people in ex-cultural society. They just held very transphobic and queerphobic views in general, and it leads me to not engage with that part of the Newcastle Uni community, which is a shame, as belonging to that society was one of the things I was looking forward to there, as there are not many others with the same identity in my engineering cohort." So again, it is just sometimes cultural societies specifically do, like, if you don't feel free enough and safe enough to, like, talk about these things, then it is just quite disheartening, especially if it's something that you were looking forward to.
Yeah, especially when it is in like these obviously groups that a lot of people are marginalised for anyway, whether that's BAME or LGBT, where a lot of people are just looking for a place to be safe, as you said, making that safe space anything but.
Exactly.
Sort of just like defeats the purpose of
exactly.
that, because I mean, obviously I can't really speak from experience, but I imagine anyone in those LGBTQ plus like sort of events and stuff, outside of those events, they get like a lot of hate or whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
So when they do go to be with other people like them, they're not necessarily expected to be met with the same sort of response that they get from other people. Because then they're like, oh well, why would I go from being hated outside of the group to then just being in the group and hated as well? I'd just rather stay at home.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I completely agree with that. All right, so now we're going to talk about the findings of Indema, which were triangulated with the findings from our realist systematic review. So we're going to talk about context, mechanisms, and outcomes that they showed. So the context for the first one is that Black and other people of colour students in primarily white institutes seek and find community in other minority student groups across campus. That's, you know, aside from engineering. And that like predominantly makes them feel unwelcome in kind of the engineering organizations, hence why they feel the need to seek familial capital outside of their engineering zones, and it just generally within engineering makes them feel like they don't belong here necessarily.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what we covered with our quotes of, it's just, and that's why people seek other societies, because they just don't feel like they have anyone within their cohort of engineering to actually understand them.
Yeah, I'm just like sat here wondering, with obviously like these sort of, like I was like, I can relate to wanting to be with people in your, like people that know you sort of thing. Just like if I like obviously come to uni and I just sort of look for people similar to me and make quite good friends, I'm just wondering, does that sort of then like mean just because I'm now friends with a group of people, it just sort of limits my being able to be friends with people that aren't in that group? So obviously, like if Black and other people of colour, like it says in here, don't really feel comfortable in scenarios with other like people, like, you know, white institutes, and then they go out and find people like them, are they sort of like just limiting their friendship
It is
group?
difficult because
Yeah,
then
it's like, where do you find the balance? Where if I come and, you know, I speak to a few white people, like, oh, you know what, you're not kind of my people, but then I might be missing out on like other white people that I'd, you know, be pretty good friends with, maybe even more so than people that are like me. But just because like now I've limited, you know what, these white people aren't so good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. The next one is identity-based student and societies, even ethnic, race, and gender-specific engineering organizations can make participants feel unwelcome. So, like we'd said before, it's kind of that idea of some societies, despite feeling like they're supposed to be like, you know, engaging and welcoming to everyone, it just doesn't necessarily feel like that. And within that, it's that some people who should feel kind of with matching identities, but have like these atypical characteristics as well, such as like their accent, skin color, language that's spoken, and those things, despite having some similarities, make them still feel sort of like separated. But again, I think I do agree with your point. It is just a case of, you know, exploring different cultures and that willingness.
Yeah, like I think with me now, like I have a nice balance. And I think that is just from being open to go try anything. So like whatever, different societies and stuff. but I think it is hard to be like that, because obviously I think, as like most people want to do, is just sort of like comfort in their sort of friendship groups, and a lot of people, me included, would just feel more comfortable with people like them. So then obviously then it does cause these issues where it's like, oh well, I'm only hanging out with people like me, which necessarily isn't a bad thing, but then
Yeah.
it just does have this sort of connotations of Newcastle being a bit of a restricting place to make friends.
Yeah.
So I think it is hard to find a little balance of making friends with all groups of people. I think that's what the society should sort of be.
Exactly. And again, not to feel like, not to have a reduced sense of belonging from your own ethnic society, from something that you feel you
Yeah.
should relate to, but you've kind of felt like it's not as open as you thought it would be.
Yeah, like I think your own ethnic societies, I think they're like expecting to make friends with like someone who's outside your ethnic group would be a little bit like presumptuous. Like I think, you know, going to your own ethnic society is, you're sort of there to make friends with people of your own ethnic
Exactly.
society. But I think the other societies that you could be a part of, like football, engineering, you know, whatever it is, I think those societies have more of an impending like need to, or we should get other groups of people together, because like those societies that we talked about, like Pakistan society or whatever, you sort of should be expecting to only make friends with people that are like you,
Yeah.
just because that's what those societies
Exactly,
are for.
yeah.
Like I think if I went to the Pakistan society, which I did, and I didn't really find many Pakistani people there, then it's just like, oh, that defeats the whole purpose of a
Yeah.
Pakistan society. So I think there it should be just people like me. But the other societies are where I'd go to make friends with other people
Yeah.
and find out about other things.
And it's an important skill to have, because when you think about it from not just a uni perspective, but in the future when you're working, you're always going to be with people from different backgrounds,
Yeah.
different ethnicities, completely different points of their life. Like, that is the reality of like industry.
Yeah.
So to try and develop those skills in university, I think, is a very important thing to try and do.
Yeah.
And that's how you do it: going to societies, meeting different people, and being willing to like engage with different people as well.
Yeah, I mean, we touched upon it before, where a lot of, you know, these, obviously in university as well and outside of university, is who you know.
Exactly.
So networking is a really big thing in any sort of field. So being able to talk to anyone helps quite a lot.
Yeah.
Whether that's, you know, interviews and you know, just or events here at work. If you know a lot of people, it opens a lot more doors.
Absolutely.
So I think it's definitely a skill that people should feel like, you know, maybe I'll put myself out of my comfort zone a little bit, and you know, I think they'll start to see a little bit more of an expansion of their friendship group, but then also
Absolutely.
just more people that they can just go to ask for help for uni and stuff like that.
Yeah. So now we can talk about what can actually be done for, solutions, suggestions on what we can do to help people feel more comfortable, like just suggestions on what could the uni or, industry in general do to provide more support or just provide more opportunities for people of colour to feel comfortable and happy. So once again, we've got the context, mechanism and outcome sort of style. So the first one is similar course schedule within peers of same colour. So the mechanism of this is formation of study groups with peers of same colour, eliminating exposure to racial stereotypes about student abilities, and this is hoping to have them make friends, build familial capital, have academic support that they feel comfortable with, and the outcome is perceived success in the course and increased sense of belonging. I do think it's a good idea for, people who especially want to be with people that they feel comfortable with. And as a starting off point as well, is a really good idea. But I do think that it would inevitably need to become merged with other people from different backgrounds, just because otherwise you're essentially limiting yourself.
I disagree with that statement
Okay.
completely, because imagine if like Newcastle, coming to uni, and now I'm suddenly grouped with all Pakistani people. Like I think like a lot of people would like then just say, oh well, why are you grouping people
Yeah, it does seem
it has
quite...
like really negative
Yeah.
connotations. I understand the thought process behind it, but like a course schedule where like I think it's your main point of uni, I think grouping just the same people, I think that would be really bad.
Having that kind of timetable wouldn't necessarily have the effect they want.
It might, like, you know, you might be able to make friends more easy and you know, be able to talk to people a little bit easier. But I think the actual connotations of like grouping people like that, where well, you know, you're white, you go here, you're brown, you go here,
Yeah.
you're black, you go here. I just
And that's
think
the thing, how far do you go? Do you go
yeah,
just color? Do you go as far as to like which country they're from? It's kind of a
Nazi-ish kind of like if that even if
it
that
is a
makes
scary. I think I see kind of where they're coming from
but I don't necessarily think
and it
that's
should
the
be
way
a
to go
choice
for it.
necessarily. Like it could be a choice of maybe it's an option for certain people who would want that.
Yeah.
To have that kind of support with people that they maybe feel more comfortable with based on that.
Like it might just be like the best sort of thing to do something like that is a society where it's like, you know, like Afro-Caribbeans in engineering, and you know maybe there's people that feel comfortable asking other Afro-Caribbean people for help. We'll then just go to that.
Yeah.
But I think I actually adjusting the course schedule. One, like logistically, it'd be a nightmare because like having to get all these lecturers to, because like realistically, most courses here are majority white people.
Yeah.
There's no getting around that. Like up
No.
to this moment.
And it would be a bit scary to just see these tiny groups and these massive groups of just.
So there'd be a group of like 150 white people and then like maybe 30 brown people, which I think, and then even like with brown people, am I going to be sat next to the, you know, someone from Bangladesh or someone from India? Like, are you grouping us all together, or is it just going to be the 3 Pakistanis who are on the course sat in a room? I think that definitely would cause a lot of issues. There'd be a lot of racial connotations behind doing something like that.
I completely see what you mean.
Yeah, a society, however, where if it's like, Pakistanis in engineering, where you can get like first, second, third, fourth years in a room.
Exactly, because if it's stages, there's more people.
Yeah.
If it's your stage, like even again, for example, my degree, being a woman, there's barely any of us.
Yeah.
There's barely any like Asian or brown identifying people, and even then, I'm not sure which country they identify from. So it would just almost be ridiculous to have 2 or 3 people in a room together in like this setting.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, yeah, for like obviously, if like again, if you want to just like women, like maybe like a women in STEM society where you can just, you know, a place where you'll feel comfortable, ask other people for help. I think that's definitely the way to go. But I think if they did something like this, then it'd be like all over the news, or Newcastle separating students. Like
I think the society thing that you said is definitely a better approach, having like that. If people feel like they want to have their, but again, there's going to be stages. There's going to be more than one, like stage 1 or stage 2. It'll be all of them, and that would build like networking as well in a place that some people might feel more comfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
But I agree with you on that.
Like with this, like even let's say if it was plausible and there was no connotations behind it, you'd have to have like lecturers teaching the same content like 3 or 4 times, and there's already like a bunch of lecturers striking and stuff because they don't get paid enough.
Yeah.
And then having them to teach the same thing, it just sort of like spreads them too thin.
And then it's also a question of the lecturers themselves. Would they make it a lecturer as a that person?
Taught by a white lecturer, and like you're gonna have to hire a Pakistani lecturer. Maybe that makes me feel more comfortable. It just sort of then, you know, creates that. Oh, that's really unnecessary, I think.
So the second one is forming holistic support structures, an induction program, academic counselling, orientation, similar course schedule. Again, we've talked about that maybe not being a great, necessarily a great option. But by creating opportunities for the formation of social networks leads to students adjusting more quickly to the university environment and bypassing some of the well-documented negative effects of racial isolation that students of colour often experience. So this is kind of more talking about the transition into university, which I think this is, I agree with this. Having that kind of support would be quite beneficial to people, especially people, again, who do feel like maybe it's harder for them, being a person of colour, to find places that they're... And that's not necessarily like, again, grouping them with people of their own, but just having that kind of holistic support to be able to feel comfortable in engaging with different people and feeling like they're in a space that they won't be like racially isolated by.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think the support program like definitely like the way to go. I think it's just some people prefer being in smaller groups anyway. Like no one's talking in a group of like, especially on some like lecturers like that. I have been to lectures where there's like 200 people and stuff like that. No one wants to put their hand up and like speak, just because it is a little bit daunting. So I think yeah, smaller and groups and stuff like that,
And
definitely
just
the way to go.
a group for, even if it is just for the transition period.
But yeah, I think like for example like induction program being like similar to the course, trying to group everyone in a similar course structure. I think that there are some things where it just should be everyone, just because like we touched on before, where's the balance? Where like yeah, it's nice to be with your own people as well, but you still need to make friends with other people as well.
Yeah.
So if it's like, oh no, we'll have the similar course structure as to people like me, or like an induction thing where it's just people like me, I just think that's sort of like, oh, there's no need for it. But
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
do actually don't want to go make friends with people who aren't like me. Because I'm trying to think, like, imagine if they did do that, and then you just saw a bunch of white people in a room for a course like that. The connotations for that, where it's like, oh, that group is seen as more superior or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then they'll be like, oh, they're getting this lecturer who's better than this lecturer.
Yeah,
Like
it
that.
just
Like, why?
causes quite a few problems.
I just think it's a bit
So the last sort of promoting mechanism that was discussed was identity-based peer mentors. So through a social support and tight-knit community, having conversations about identity, students get to explore their identities, learn about their identity-related issues in and outside of engineering, and are provided with historical or contextual information to situate their experience, as well as learn the language to describe these. So identity-based experiences feel validated. And that way they feel appreciated for their whole self and not just their STEM identity, and they recognize and challenge identity-based stereotypes and expectations. I think in terms of the peer mentor scheme, it should be something separate to peer mentors, because peer mentors are very much, in my opinion, it is very course-based, it's very degree-based. But I think the idea of having someone who acts sort of in the role of a peer mentor, but maybe more identity-based, for those, again, I think it is something that you should choose to have. It's not something that should just be imposed upon you, because some people might not feel the need for it, or that might make them feel even more uncomfortable with the uni just being like, here's someone who's the same color as you to help you.
Like, I think it should be like maybe a little, when they are like getting a peer mentor or something, maybe
it's something they choose.
Yeah, a little box they can tick, oh, I'd rather be with someone who, and then on the peer mentor side as well, oh, I'd rather, but I think, yeah, there are a lot of like logistical issues behind it, where what if there's not enough peer mentors who are like me?
Exactly. But I think the sort of the mechanisms that is being described do make sense. The idea of
but I think
getting
what
that
we talked
historical.
about before, where it's like a separate society, makes a little bit more sense, because then there's going to be like no real shortage of people there, because there's over the whole actual course and different stages there should be quite a lot of people.
And maybe that's the society could kind of do that. Like, for example, if you're wanting that sort of one-on-one or something that you would get with, say, a peer mentor, the society could run sort of a like, not like an event, I guess, or something that's similar to that, where anyone from any stage course who would wish to participate can act as essentially a peer mentor, someone who can like validate your experiences and give their experiences from what they've had and dealt with within like the context of your of being a person of color and your ethnicity.
Yeah, like I think the balance is that it needs to be a choice.
Exactly.
Where you have the opportunity to, make friends with other people, but then also make friends with people like you. But yeah, I think definitely we talked about at the start where, grouping people under an umbrella term like BAME, I think grouping them together just like that as well would be just as bad, where it's just not necessary.
Absolutely. And I think the final thing I want to say is, and we kind of touched on this before, but I think one of the biggest things is like publicity of like, for example, societies and like what they're doing, the Asian nights out, things that you would want to know that would make you feel kind of more at home or at ease. For example, like, you know, publicize places that are best to eat for certain religions or certain cultures that might make them feel comfortable. Like properly advertise nights out that might make a person of color feel more at home or at ease. Things like this should be more publicized.
Yeah, obviously, I think like a lot of these issues that we talked about probably not solved, but there'd be a lot less of if like these societies were a little bit more vocal about what's going on, or if other societies had a little bit more going on.
Yeah.
So I think once you get like the societies a little bit more involved in, you know, bringing in people towards the group, you know, it'd be a lot less easy. It'd be a lot more easier for people like me or other people to just get involved and then get a little diverse group of
Exactly.
friends and yeah.
And that's a very realistic kind of something that can be done almost immediately. It's just more advertising, more. For example, I think, was it last year or something, we had sort of like a cultural event where different cultures, I think it was in the Student Union building, and different cultures could show off like things of them. I would say something like that near the start of the year, where there's people who are trying to find like-minded people or just want to explore different cultures. That is one of the best ways where you can find people that are kindred to you. You can find people who aren't necessarily the same ethnicity as you, but you're interested in what they have in their culture. And I think that at the start would be a great way to make people feel more welcome and to make people like actually understand cultures more and see other cultures as well.
Yeah, I think stuff like that they should do not just at the start, but a lot more regularly as well.
Exactly.
Like for example, like I don't know, like a culture week or something, where it is just like an ongoing thing within the uni.
And just continuously throughout the year,
Yeah,
like
just because I think like some people, I don't know, maybe they missed freshers or they just weren't here, or you know they miss certain thing. You know, I think.
Or they might be busy the day that you
Yeah,
choose
yeah.
to do
So
it.
I think like the more exposure it has, the less issues that you'll see. Just because then people will find their little groups of friends that they want to be in.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of approaches that the societies and uni should be doing. Just actually putting them in place.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ali, for joining us today. Thank you everyone for watching, and we will be back next week, well, next time with another episode.